Picture a cool, peaceful spring night in the Soviet Union. It is April 25, 1986. The 50,000 residents of Pripyat are asleep. They live in a model city, built specifically to house the scientists, engineers, and families of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. Less than 2 miles away from those sleeping families, inside the control room of Reactor Number 4, the environment is far from peaceful. A group of tired engineers is awake, monitoring a wall of dials and highly sensitive controls under immense stress. These operators are preparing to run a routine test. This specific procedure is designed to make the plant safer in the event of a total power failure. This schematic shows the test's objective. If the plant lost all external power, the emergency diesel generators would take 1 minute to kick in. The engineers wanted to know if the physical momentum of a slowing turbine could generate enough residual electricity to keep the cooling water pumps running for that single minute. It is a delicate operation, but a regional power grid controller delayed the test for hours. By the time clearance finally comes through past midnight, the experienced day shift has gone home. Soviet bureaucratic demands force an exhausted night shift to take over the procedure. Operating under the pressure of strict management, they are pushed to complete a volatile test with minimal oversight. As the operators begin powering down the reactor for the delicate test, things quickly spiral out of control. A mix of operator error and the reactor's complex design causes the power level to plummet almost to zero. The engineers need the power at a specific level to proceed. In a desperate attempt to force the power back up, they start manually pulling out the reactor's control rods. Control rods are the brakes of a nuclear reactor. Dropping into the core, they absorb moving neutrons to stop the chain reaction. By pulling almost all of them out, operators removed the brakes entirely, placing the reactor in a highly unstable state. Pushing to hit the required power metrics, the crew stripped away the only safety mechanisms, standing between a controlled reaction and a nuclear runaway. At 1:23 in the morning, they initiate the test and shut off the steam to the turbines. As the water flow decreases, the remaining water inside the reactor rapidly boils into steam. This flowchart visualizes a deadly loop built into the Soviet RBMK reactor design. More steam generates more power, and that spike in power generates even more steam. The power output spikes violently. Inside the control room, the shift supervisor hits the AZ5 emergency shutdown button. It is designed to drop all control rods into the core, killing the reaction. But due to a classified flaw, the rods had graphite tips, which briefly accelerate the reaction. Entering simultaneously, they triggered a massive, instantaneous power surge. The water instantly vaporizes, creating a steam explosion so powerful it blows the 1,000-ton biological shield off the top of the reactor. Moments later, a second explosion tears the building apart, launching highly radioactive material into the dark night sky. Because of a hidden design flaw, the exact button designed to save the operators' lives served as the final trigger that blew the entire reactor apart. Plant leadership immediately refused to believe the reactor had exploded. They sent workers into the dark, flooded corridors to manually open water valves, forcing them into radiation fields that would cause their bodies to shut down within days. Local firefighters arrived within minutes, wearing only standard canvas uniforms. They stood on the roof and fought the blaze while surrounded by chunks of burning graphite, absorbing lethal doses of radiation to stop the fire from spreading. While these first responders fought the fire, the Soviet government prioritized a strict media blackout. They cut phone lines and stopped trains, leaving the citizens of Pripyat to live their lives for 36 hours while radioactive ash rained down on the city. The secret finally unraveled when radiation alarms were triggered at a nuclear plant in Sweden, over 600 miles away. Only then was the Soviet government forced to admit to the world that an accident had occurred. A massive cleanup operation followed, drafting 600,000 liquidators from across the Soviet Union. These miners, soldiers, and engineers worked to smother the core and dig cooling tunnels in sweltering radioactive heat. When intense radiation fried the circuits of remote-controlled robots, the military used biorobots, young soldiers in makeshift lead aprons. They were sent onto the roof for 90 seconds at a time to manually shovel radioactive graphite into the core. Containing the disaster ultimately required the health and lives of hundreds of thousands of citizens who were forced to compensate for the catastrophic failure of the plant's hardware. Reactor Number 4 was eventually encased in a massive concrete and steel structure to contain the remaining radiation and prevent further contamination of the continent. The area surrounding the plant is now the Chernobyl exclusion zone, a contaminated region the size of Luxembourg where human habitation is strictly forbidden. Pripyat remains a silent ghost town. A rusting Ferris wheel sits in an amusement park that was scheduled to open just days after the explosion. Without human intervention, wildlife has moved back into the decaying Soviet architecture. Bears, wolves, and wild horses now roam through the empty streets and derelict buildings. The disaster also had profound geopolitical consequences. Mikhail Gorbachev, the final leader of the Soviet Union, later reflected that the fallout from Chernobyl was perhaps the true catalyst for the collapse of the Soviet Union. The event remains a case study in the consequences of prioritizing political image over safety. In the end, the reactor's design could not withstand the physical reality of the test, and the costs were felt by millions across the world.